What I'd like to do today is not sort of go through the details of individual projects. I'd rather try and paint, if you like, a wider perspective of what is driving a lot of the development in the Pilbara and maybe hazard a guess as to what the future might hold. It is often said that Western Australia is the powerhouse of the Australian economy. If that is true, it is equally true that the Pilbara is the powerhouse of the West Australian economy. Western Australia provides 70% of all Australian exports to China and around 45% of all Australian exports to each of Japan, India and Korea, and also high rates in other countries. The Pilbara is not only important in this state and in this nation, the Pilbara has a global significance. China, modern China, the emergence thereof is clearly the economic phenomenon of this century. And it's interesting that Australia's relationship with China, and our biggest trading partner, is largely been led by trade from the Pilbara. So you can expect with confidence that probably for the next 20 years, China will continue to record very high growth rates. It has a long, long way to go in terms of its economic development. What we're seeing today is not simply a transitory phase, and that's why one of the reasons I never use the word boom. This is not a boom, this is a long-term period of extraordinary economic growth. And China gets over 40% of its iron ore from Western Australia, and China's preferred source of iron ore is this state and this region. But we will have a role in the relationship with China and making sure that China understands the expectations of this state and of the industry and the people and the regions of this state. Natural gas is the preferred energy source for Asia. They will increase the reliance of their economy on natural gas. It's got massive advantages, and Asia wants natural gas. The demand outlook, driven by rising population, rising wealth, rising urbanisation, is incredibly strong. So the great resource is the resource off the West Australian coast, which is something like 90% of Australia's reservoir natural gas resources. Iron ore production in Western Australia will go from around 400 million tonnes now to probably around 800 million tonnes or more by the end of this decade. The other aspect is our production of natural gas in Western Australia, which is around 17 million tonnes, or around 6 or 7% of world production. That will be, without doubt, 60 million tonnes by the end of this decade. It is going to more than treble. At that point, Western Australia will be second only to the Gulf state of Qatar in natural gas production and export. So you are seeing, we are all seeing, you are all experiencing an absolute transformation, a doubling of iron ore and a trebling of natural gas, and the emergence of Western Australia as the most significant regional economy in Asia Pacific. Why it matters is that during this decade, during perhaps even the next 3 or 4 years, this state is building its productive capacity for perhaps the next 50 years in terms of the ports, the railways, the mine developments, the LNG precincts and the like. This is the building decade, and that brings with it strains and pressures, but this is the time we have to do it. Port Hedland Port in the next few years will double from its current capacity and export rate to probably around 350 million tonnes, and over the same period I would expect BHP will proceed with its outer harbour decision, $15 billion decision, but that will then take the total Port Hedland capacity up around to 800 million tonnes. You're already the largest port in Australia. You will be the largest port by a large multiple by the end of this decade. I really do commend the companies and the people that work with them. There is an incredible can-do attitude in the Pilbara, and that's particularly evident, I think, in Port Hedland. As all these extraordinary developments take place, and the current count is there's about $107 billion worth of resource development projects in Western Australia that are either in construction or committed, and there's about another $194 billion of projects in the pipeline. This is not only Australia's biggest investment cycle, it's probably one of the biggest ever in the history of the planet. And that is understood well overseas, probably better than it is understood in Australia. And under the Pilbara Cities program, there is a rebuilding of the Pilbara towns and cities, particularly Karratha and Port Hedland. And I don't think I've ever seen as much activity in a place as I saw in South Hedland just an hour ago driving around. And I think it's a great credit to everyone involved in that. And yes, it all seems to be happening at once, but this is basically a rebuilding of this city. And every one of us is living through a moment of history, and we should realise that this is not just a period of a few projects. This is an historic moment that will probably in value terms exceed the 1960s, maybe not the pioneering spirit of the 60s so much, and is unlikely to ever be repeated in Australian history again. So keep going, work hard and make it happen.